So today we will talk about promising policies to address alcohol harms, and we will focus on Quebec a little bit as a case study. This presentation has many slides, but I will go quickly over a few of them. But I wanted to give you all of the information so that you have access to all of the content. Quickly, l'Association pour la santé publique du Québec is an independent non-profit organization that brings together nearly 1,000 citizens to promote sustainable health. So why this webinar today? Primarily to address evolving knowledge of the impact of alcohol on health and as a risk factor in various social issues. And also it follows, if you wish, it's a summary of a series of webinars that the ASPQ gave a little bit earlier this year. Many of the documents and case studies that I will talk about today are in English, available in English. Thank you to the help and funding of CPHA, the Canadian Public Health Association, through one of their programs. So we thank them very much. We will talk about 4 policies, more precisely, that will be related to advertising, sponsorships, warning labels, and prices. The first policy is related to reducing exposure to alcohol advertising in public spaces. Before we speak in detail of what this is about, it's important to understand what is advertising. Advertising is a set of practices, techniques, activities employed to bring attention to a product or a brand. That advertising can be done with or without direct solicitation. I'll give you an example. If we ask to get bulletin news through a web page, a business, for example, then we have solicited the advertising. So we are directly solicited. Conversely, if we are walking downtown, for example, we do not ask to see or to buy products necessarily, but we are influenced and indirectly. For this presentation today, we're going to focus on publicity in public space without solicitation. And public space or outdoor advertising is really present in many places, so that we forget about it or we don't see it necessarily, but it has impacts. We can think, for example, about digital space, public transport, businesses, but today we will focus on physical spaces. So for a little bit more detailed definition of what advertising and outdoor space can be, the Scottish government proposed an interesting definition in its consultation to modify the law. So you have the reference here in the presentation. It can go for different buildings, commercial facilities, to public transport. And why are we interested by these spaces? It's because it has a great interest for the alcohol industry. Let's not forget that through public spaces, they can reach a broad public and a very diversified public as well, going from minors, very young people, to older people.
Pour bien comprendre, je vais vous
To understand, I will give you a few examples. These are pictures taken in Quebec of advertising, alcohol advertising in public spaces. You will see that there are many and they are very frequent. And I'd like to encourage you, or I challenge you when you on your way back from work tonight to have a look and see where you can find such ads. Here, you see advertising in public transport, on the wall here, on the escalator, even for the bicycles, also on the bus. Once we're out of public transport, here, when you're in your car, you can still see on the side of the highway, on billboards, on fences, and on business frontage, sometimes in places where you wouldn't expect them, for example, at fuel stations. So when we fill up our car, we can be encouraged to get a 2-for-1. Other business frontage. This is a business, for example, that is located under a daycare. And finally, the business frontage of our public society, Société des Alcools du Québec, which are advertising that are big, that are probably the most colorful that we have on the market. All this exposure to advertising has impacts on drinking habits, but also on perception and on how we perceive alcohol consumption in our society. And sometimes it returns a very positive image. In Quebec, there are regulation and anchor points, obviously, but no rules exist to regulate advertising in public space. Specifically, there is a rule, which is Règlement sur la publicité, la promotion et les programmes éducatifs en matière de boissons alcooliques. And that rule is applicable to alcohol licensee like bars, restaurants, grocery stores, but it doesn't apply, or very little, the space or the form or the content of the advertising. And it is not related to the state corporation, even though, as we saw, many actions are necessary in that field. There are other rules, for example, in municipalities that can have power in that field. Elsewhere, we don't reinvent the wheel. We can be inspired by other models. For Prince Edward Island, for example, they prohibit the advertising of alcohol by billboards or eliminated signs in public areas, except for those of the Crown Corporation. In Saskatchewan, there are restrictions, zoning restrictions that have been implemented to prohibit signage near primary or secondary schools and places of worship. Another model more stringent is the Loi Evin in France that strictly limits the marketing of alcohol in public spaces. Outdoor or print advertising or displays are permitted to provide product information only, with no lifestyle advertising. Finally, the city of New York prefers or put together a structure to prohibit advertising in municipal infrastructures and facilities and the transit service. If you would like to know more about the influencer models that are in place elsewhere, the ASPQ published a case study, and it is available in English and in French on its webpage. You have the links in the presentation. So for outdoor advertising, we can think that a promising strategy for our government would be to reduce exposure, which would be the goal. So we could prohibit it in public space or close to places frequented mainly by minors, daycares, for example, schools. And it could also we could also add other places like therapy center, treatment center. We could also think about along the streets and the highways because mixing together, of course, driving and alcohol consumption is prohibited anyway. If we think about alcohol sponsorship, what is sponsorship? It's financial or material support for an event, product, organization, or person for direct advertising benefit. It's advertising because we buy a visibility or place a product. We cannot, it is not philanthropy or a donation that would have no interest without visibility. Particularity now that we need to add to this is influencer marketing. We forget about it often when we create regulation, but it is based on the same principle as a sponsorship. It is a advertisement strategy, which consists in paying someone for their services, a content creator, in exchange of visibility for a product. Businesses use sponsorships more and more to boost the company image, to minimize effects and strengthen perceptions that we might have of a product or a brand, to maintain a certain social norm by embodying a fun and even healthy lifestyle. So a social norm that is favorable. Also, we promote product sales at and or after the event because there is an emotional connection to the brand between the event and the product. So it really influences, it has a great impact. The exposure to marketing, including sponsorship and the promotional items, influences perceptions, habits, and levels of consumption. Many studies stress the presence and influence of sports sponsorships. So it creates loyalty to the team and the sponsor. And it is notable among younger publics. So in Quebec, here we have many of those sponsorships. And once again, I invite you to look around you. We have a lot in Quebec and sport facilities, ski resorts, Red Bull events, for example, events, extreme sports, if you like, also in a hockey stadium. And even some teams like junior hockey teams are sponsored by alcoholic beverage brands. And we also have some in the healthcare community, which is surprising. For example, events for charities or hospitals, even with products that are created for these events, which could be enticing for children or younger public. Cultural and artistic events. I think about festivals here that are often sponsored by such companies. Family events like Quebec's Carnival. Music festival, very well known and worldwide, well known all around the world, like Osheaga, and all of that to connect emotionally with a variety of publics. It is not in Quebec prohibited to sponsor sporting events. The regulation respecting promotion, advertising, and educational programs relating to alcohol beverages has general rules on advertising, and it prohibits manufacturer from inciting minors to consume or from promoting consumption. So sometimes the sponsorship isn't interpreted as being a sponsorship. And so it's very difficult to regulate, but we have a measure that we deem essential to keep. There's a lot of pressure to get rid of it, but right now it is prohibited to advertise on clothing and equipment intended for use by a person of minor age in a sport or in any other activity in which they engage. So we can think about hockey team jerseys, for example, for people that are 18 or years old or less. But as I said, there is a lot of pressure to change this prohibition because obviously it will generate a lot of money and it would finance more sporting events. Even if there is a lot of pressure, a survey launched by the ASPQ in 2022 showed that 65% of 15-year-olds and up in Quebec agree with forbidding alcohol sponsorships for groups or events attended by minors. So there's leveraging here that the government can use because we see that it would be accepted. As I said earlier, in France, the loi E20 prohibits any type of advertising, including alcohol sponsorship. In Finland, advertising, including sponsorship of hard liquor, is prohibited. And in Ireland, in a very new regulations, alcohol sponsorships are prohibited at events where the majority of participants are children or of which involve driving. There are also restrictions to sporting events. In the Northwest Territories, it's interesting, they adopted prohibitions stating that no holder of a manufacturing license or any other manufacturer of liquor shall sponsor an event, activity, or organization if the value of the sponsorship is over $1,500. For university institutions, some have adopted alcohol sponsorship policies. We know that it is often related to heavy drinking. Laws on tobacco and cannabis in Quebec are also very good examples because sponsorships are prohibited, direct and indirect, but companies still give donations without promotions. To know more about sponsorship and influencer marketing, You can have a look at the case studies created by the ASPQ in French and English. So when we talk about sponsorships, the strategies that could be promising, first of all, to ensure the correct interpretation of the term advertising in legislation and regulations. We could draw on cannabis and tobacco rules or examples from other jurisdictions. We could also encourage municipalities and cities to control sponsorships, for example, during their events. There could be internal policies that would limit the amount of sponsorship or of certain products. And as I said earlier, universities and student associations need also to be made more aware. I will now talk quickly about warning labels, and I will go quickly because we've talked about it a lot in the community of practice here. I will focus on something that we don't talk about too often. There are many types of warnings and labels. For example, information about the standard drink, the number of portions, the risks, about benchmarks or nutritional values. When we talk about warnings, often we want to bring forward more information about alcohol consumption. In the last few years, we've observed that many knowledge, some data were less understood or lacking, notably the link, alcohol cancer link or alcohol link during pregnancy. I mentioned this today because it's something we talk more and more about. The Bill S254 from Independent Senator Patrick Brazeau. When we talk about labeling, we often hear, "Oh, this is federally regulated," but in fact, it could be it's a jurisdiction. The jurisdictions and power should be shared between the federal and provincial governments. The federal standards governing packaging and labeling. And the province also could decide or ask to put warnings on packaging of products that are sold within their territories. These measures are also very popular among the population. So majority of Quebec adults agree in Quebec with mandating messages on alcohol containers to warn about the dangers of alcohol consumption during pregnancy. They also want to have more information related to the risks of alcohol consumption. For more than half of Quebec adults, they feel that labeling the number of standard portions of alcohol will help them monitor their own consumption. We have examples of what is being done elsewhere. For example, in the Yukon and in the Northwest Territories, many conventions have been held and a pilot project, but in other countries where they require messages about health risks. For example, Ireland, South Korea, California, and the European Union is looking into the matter at the moment. Here you have images of what the warnings could look like. In Ontario, without being a warning on the product, they enforce messaging display an obligation to display prevention and warning messages concerning alcohol and pregnancy in sales location. Et une étude des cas, encore une fois, par case study, sorry, by the ASPQ is also available. So in terms of a warning, and it is strategy that would have benefits, but I want to say that it's also a strategy that is not standalone. It cannot be adopted on its own to be efficient. It should be integrated at a more global strategy, overall strategy related to alcohol consumption. And in order to do so, we can be inspired by other provinces and countries. We often neglect that aspect, but the material conditions, the format, visibility of the messages is often put aside. And I will give you an example here of a message that is maybe not too clear or the visibility wasn't put forward. So here, can you see the warning on this advertising? Here you are in the left corner. And even if I make it bigger, it's very difficult to see. It says drink moderately. So when we talk about messaging to awareness, to prevention, the controls and regulations are very important. And finally, about pricing, it's interesting to ask questions about this policy because price is attractive. It's one of the important aspects for many consumers, and we know that it has an influence. There's also a diversity of strategies that aim to lower the sales price. We can think, for example, of discounts, promotions. There's been debate recently about taxes on alcoholic products at the federal level and about sales on products from Crown Corporation. And obviously, the minimum price policy is a policy that is complex and it has great impacts, negative impacts and or positive. It is complex and it is important to learn more about this reality. There are several types of price promotions, and that is sometimes an aspect that is neglected. We can think about discounts, for example, with the goal to lower or to give the impression that the sales price is lowered so that we're getting a good deal. It can take many forms like contests, cross promotions. So you buy one product and you get another one, buy one, get one, tax payments, cashback or loyalty programs. Once again, it's a strategy that's used widely in Quebec. We see many billboards of multiple sales, like 2-for-1s, contests. And as I said earlier, these promotions or these reductions are advertised widely, excuse me. Concerning the minimum sales price rules in Quebec, there is a floor price, but only for beer that is sold in grocery stores and convenience stores. It doesn't apply to the other types of alcohol, and it varies. It changes depending on concentration, alcohol content by a volume. Applicable and of course, we added the tax, federal and provincial. Prices of products sold at Quebec liquor stores are covered by trade agreements. Often we want to apply a minimum price. Often we come into, we are challenged by the fair trade rules. Promotions on prices. We prohibit in Quebec the advertising that promotes irresponsible consumption, and that's been interpreted, for example, by prohibiting like open bars, ladies' night, featuring free alcohol, the 3-for-1 or 4-for-1, or cheap drinks. But we allow the 2-for-1 if it's a promotion that is recurring. We prohibit gratuity on alcohol, tips, or some kind of advertising or discounts, but many licensees still promote and go against the rules, if you wish. All of Canadian provinces have a minimum minimum price on alcohol, but in Quebec, as I said, doesn't have any for all of the alcohols. And there are other models elsewhere in Scotland, in Wales, and Ireland that have adopted a minimum price model or price per unity per standard drink. That's important to note. In Ireland, they have an interesting model. They prohibit promotions related to the price of alcohol, including discounts on multiple purchases, tips, cross promotions, and loyalty programs. In the Northwest Territories, they prohibit the distribution of discount coupons. And in Ontario's, they have a guideline, limits price promotions based on the purchase of other beverages. I think that if we think about promoting and advertising of a promotion, there is a lot to do here. And we can say, yes, we should have a minimum price, but we could also prohibit cross promotion, like buy one, get one, or to prohibit promotions, happy hours, or 2-for-1, for example. Royalty programs, some businesses are integrated the notion that the points that are being accumulated cannot be exchanged for alcoholic products. So to conclude, I would like to give you an example of an act including all the suggested policies. It's a case study of the Ireland's public health law in alcohol that was adopted in 2018, and it includes a strategy, but many policies related to all the aspects I just talked about. To know more about Ireland and the context in which they adopted legislative measures, you can have a look at the case study from the ASPQ in French and in English. We have other publications related to alcohol also available on our website under alcohol. This concludes. You have also references at the end of the slides if you're interested, but this concludes my presentation, and I am now open to answer to your questions, both in French and English.